He married a woman in a wheelchair just for the money, but he had no idea what she was hiding. David Miller felt sweat trickling down his forehead as he spoke the words, echoing through the packed church. Every well-dressed guest represented a fortune. Every curious glance toward the bride was a reminder of what was at stake in that decisive moment of his life. "Do you take Emily Thompson as your wife?" asked the priest, and David felt the weight of the lie in the words that came out of his mouth. "I do," he replied, trying not to look directly into her eyes. Emily was radiant in her white lace dress, the veil delicately adjusted over her brown hair tied in an elegant bun. The wheelchair had been decorated with small white flowers that perfectly matched the bouquet in her hands. At 32, she emanated a serene beauty that contrasted with the tension David felt growing in his chest. When it was her turn to respond, Emily stared at David with an intensity that made him swallow hard. There was something in that look that he couldn't decipher, a depth that went beyond what he expected to find. "I do," she said, and her voice sounded firm, determined, almost as if she knew something he didn't. The priest smiled and raised his hands for the final blessing. David looked at the beautifully decorated hall of St. Joseph's Cathedral on the Southern California coast. White and gold flowers spread throughout every corner, creating a dreamlike atmosphere that contrasted with the dark reality of his intentions. 200 guests watched them, mostly influential business people and high society individuals Emily had met through her family. During the months of dating, David had strived to be the perfect son-in-law. Flowers every day, romantic dinners at expensive restaurants that she insisted on paying for, walks along the San Diego waterfront where he always accompanied her, pushing the chair with exaggerated care. Everything calculated, everything planned to win over not just her, but especially the $3 million inheritance she had received from her father, a prosperous businessman in the tech industry. "You may kiss the bride," announced the priest. David leaned in and kissed Emily gently. For a moment he felt something strange, a connection he hadn't expected. She held his face with her delicate hands and stared at him again with that penetrating gaze. "Now we are husband and wife," she whispered in his ear, and there was a note of triumph in her voice that made him wonder if he had missed something important. The guests applauded and stood up. David waved to the crowd, playing the role of the passionate groom. His mother, Nancy Miller, was in the front row, impeccably dressed in a navy blue suit. She had been the main encourager of this marriage, constantly reminding him that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to escape the life of hardship they had always had. "She is the solution to all our problems," Nancy had said months ago when David hesitated about continuing the relationship. A rich young woman, alone in the world after her father passed away, and on top of that, she needs special care. You will be her hero, and she will be our financial salvation. David pushed Emily's wheelchair down the central aisle as guests threw rose petals. The hotel ballroom had been transformed into a fairy tale setting, with crystal chandeliers, tables decorated with lush arrangements, and a dance floor that Emily had insisted on keeping, even though she knew she couldn't use it in the traditional way. During the cocktail hour, David circulated among the guests, greeting people he barely knew, but who represented Emily's social circle. Business people, doctors, lawyers, all talked about the beauty of the ceremony and how Emily deserved to be happy after everything she had been through. "The accident was 2 years ago, wasn't it?" asked an elegant lady with graying hair. "It's wonderful that she found someone like you, David. Not every man would have the courage to commit to a relationship like this." David smiled and thanked her, but the word courage bothered him. It wasn't courage that motivated him, and that truth weighed heavier and heavier on his conscience. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Emily was surrounded by a group of close friends, laughing at something one of them had said. David approached and placed his hand on her shoulder, a gesture that had become automatic over the last few months. "How are you feeling, love?" he asked, playing the part of the attentive husband. "I'm great," she replied, but David noticed a different sparkle in her eyes. "Actually, I'm feeling stronger than ever." Before he could ask what she meant by that, David's phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number made his blood run cold. The fortune you so desperately want is frozen by court order. It's not even worth half of what you imagine. You've been deceived. David hid his shock, quickly putting away the phone. He looked around for signs of who could have sent that message, but all the guests seemed engrossed in their own conversations. His heart raced. What did they mean, frozen? He had seen the bank statements, the inheritance documents. Emily had been transparent about her financial situation from the start. Is something wrong? Asked Emily, noticing his tense expression. No, nothing, he lied. Just a work message. During dinner, David could barely eat. With every bite, the anonymous message echoed in his mind. He watched Emily chat animatedly with the guests at their table, telling stories about the wedding preparations and how she had met David. She seemed genuinely happy, which only deepened the guilt growing in his chest. Do you know my mother, Mrs. Wilson? Asked Emily, pointing to a woman around 60 whom David didn't remember seeing before. She works for the event planning company that handled our wedding. David greeted the woman, who looked at him with a strange expression, almost as if she were sizing him up. There was something familiar about her face, but he couldn't place it. It's a pleasure to meet the man who won Emily's heart, said Mrs. Wilson, but her voice carried a chill that contrasted with her kind words. When dessert was served, another guest approached the table. He was a tall man, around 40, well-dressed and with a confident air that immediately put David on edge. Emily, said the man, ceremoniously kissing her hand, you look beautiful. Congratulations on the wedding. Thank you, Ryan, replied Emily, and David noticed a subtle tension in her voice. David, this is Ryan Parker, an old family friend. Ryan extended his hand to David with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. So you're the lucky man who won our Emily, said Ryan. I hope you know how to value the treasure you have. Of course I do, replied David, annoyed by the other man's familiar tone. It's interesting, continued Ryan, sitting in the empty chair beside Emily. I knew her when she could still walk. Those were different times. Emily visibly stiffened at the comment. David felt a pang of something he hadn't expected. Jealousy. There was clearly a history between the two that he knew nothing about. Ryan, please, said Emily. Today is a day of celebration. You're right, agreed Ryan, but he kept his eyes fixed directly on David. I just find it curious how people change, how priorities shift. Some people value inner richness, others have different priorities. The comment was like a stab in the back. David felt his face turn red, but before he could respond, Ryan was already standing up. I'll let you enjoy the party, he said. Emily, if you need anything at all, you know where to find me. After Ryan walked away, Emily stayed silent for a few minutes. David wanted to ask about their relationship, but something in her expression made him hesitate. Who is he exactly? He ventured finally. Someone from the past, she replied without going into details. It's not important. But David was certain it was very important. The way Ryan looked at Emily, the familiarity in his words, everything indicated a deep connection that went beyond simple family friendship. The DJ announced the newlyweds' first dance. David helped Emily position herself near the dance floor, where a special chair had been placed to allow them to dance together. The chosen song was 1,000 Years, a romantic tune Emily had insisted on including in the playlist. As they danced, David held Emily's hands and gently spun her around. She closed her eyes and smiled, seeming genuinely happy. For a moment, David forgot his financial motivations and lost himself in the beauty of that instant. There was something magical in how she moved, even limited by the chair, something that touched a part of his heart he preferred to ignore. Thank you, she whispered during the song. Why? For making me feel beautiful again. Her words hit him like a punch in the stomach. There was a vulnerability in her voice he hadn't noticed before, a fragility that contrasted with the strength she showed in daily life. When the song ended, the guests applauded. David kissed Emily on the forehead and helped her off the dance floor, but his mind was confused. The feelings he was experiencing weren't part of the plan. He should be focused on the financial goal, not getting lost in inconvenient emotions. During the party, David noticed his mother, Nancy, talking intensely with Mrs. Wilson in a more secluded corner of the hall. The two women seemed to be discussing something serious, gesturing discreetly, and occasionally looking in his and Emily's direction. This made him even more nervous. He decided to approach to hear the conversation, but before he could get close enough, his phone vibrated again. Another message from the same unknown number. "She knows exactly who you are and why you married her. The game is just beginning." David felt his legs weaken. How could she know? He had been so careful, so convincing in his role as a passionate suitor. He looked at Emily, who was talking with a group of distant cousins, laughing at something someone had said. She seemed completely relaxed, showing no sign of knowing anything beyond what he had told her about himself. But then he remembered her look during the ceremony, that intensity that had bothered him, and the words in his ear, "Now we are husband and wife," spoken with a tone of triumph that made no sense if she were just a passionate bride. "David," Emily's voice brought him back to reality. "Come here, I want to introduce you to a few more people." He approached, trying to maintain his composure, but his mind was racing. If she really knew his intentions, why had she gone through with the marriage? What else was happening that he didn't understand? The group Emily introduced him to consisted of 3 elegant women, all appearing to be in their 50s. They greeted him warmly, but David had the impression they were evaluating him like a specimen on display. "So you're the famous David," said one of them, a redhead with green eyes. "Emily talked so much about you during the wedding preparations." "I hope she said good things," he replied, forcing a smile. "Oh, yes," said another woman. "She told us how you met, how you won her over. It was quite an interesting story." David felt a pang of anxiety. He had told Emily they met at a cafe, where he offered to help her with some books she had dropped. A simple, romantic story she had accepted without question, or so he had thought. "Yes, it was a special meeting," he agreed. "It must have been," said the third woman, exchanging a meaningful look with the others. "Especially considering it was exactly where she expected to find you." The comment was like a bucket of cold water. David looked at Emily, who maintained a serene, almost amused expression. "What do you mean?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual. "Oh, nothing important," Emily said quickly. "The girls love creating mysteries where there are none." But David was sure there were mysteries, and many of them. With each passing minute, more clues emerged that there was much more going on than he had imagined. The feeling of being manipulated grew within him, but at the same time he couldn't pinpoint exactly how or why. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. When the party was at its peak, around 10 at night, another unexpected event shook David. A young woman who appeared to be about 25 entered the hall, clearly late and visibly nervous. She bore a striking resemblance to Emily, the same brown eyes, the same delicate facial structure. Emily saw her first, and her expression changed completely. The joy of the moment was replaced by a mixture of shock and concern. "Abigail," called Emily, signaling for the young woman to approach. David watched the scene with growing curiosity. Emily had never mentioned having a sister, and from the documents he had seen, she was an only child. Who was this girl who clearly had a family connection to his wife? Abigail approached hesitantly, as if unsure she should be there. She was dressed simply, in a discreet black dress that contrasted with the elegance of the other guests. "I couldn't believe it when I heard you were getting married," said Abigail, kissing Emily's cheek. "I had to come, even knowing I shouldn't." "Of course you should be here," replied Emily, but her voice was tense. "David, this is Abigail, my cousin." The hesitation before the word cousin did not go unnoticed by David. Abigail looked at him with an evaluative, almost hostile expression. "So you're the man who won over my cousin," she said, not extending her hand. "Interesting timing, don't you think?" "What do you mean?" asked David. "Abigail," warned Emily in a firm tone, "this is neither the time nor the place for that." "When will it be then?" retorted Abigail. "Do you really think he doesn't deserve to know the truth about what's going on, about what's really at stake here?" David felt his heart race. What truth? What was at stake beyond what he already knew? He looked from one woman to the other, trying to decipher the silent communication happening between them. "Abigail has been through a difficult time," Emily explained to David. "She's recovering from some personal problems." "Personal problems," repeated Abigail bitterly. "Is that what you call it?" "It's interesting how words can mask reality." "What does she mean?" insisted David. Before any of them could respond, the music stopped abruptly. The DJ announced that the bride would like to make a special toast. David accompanied Emily to the small stage set up for presentations, still troubled by the conversation with Abigail. Emily took the microphone with slightly trembling hands. The hall fell silent. All eyes turned to her. "I want to thank everyone for being here on this very special day," she began, her voice echoing clearly through the sound system. "You know, the last few years have been challenging for me. The accident changed a lot in my life, but it also taught me valuable lessons." David noticed several guests shifting uncomfortably in their chairs. There was something in the way she spoke about the accident that suggested much more than he knew of the story. "One of the things I learned," Emily continued, "is the importance of truly knowing the people we choose to share our lives with, of understanding their real motivations, their fears, their dreams, and their plans." The last word was spoken with an emphasis that made David swallow hard. She was looking directly at him as she spoke, and there was something in her expression that made him feel completely exposed. "Because of this, I'd like to announce that I intend to use part of my inheritance to create a foundation to support accident victims," she said, and David felt the floor move beneath his feet. "Half of the funds will be dedicated to this cause, which was always my father's dream." The hall erupted in applause, but David could barely breathe. Half the inheritance to charity? This wasn't part of the plans he had made. If the information from the anonymous message was correct and the funds were already committed, this decision of Emily's would mean that... "Furthermore," she continued, still looking at David, "I'd like to announce that my husband and I will sign a property agreement that fully protects my family inheritance, because true love isn't measured by what one can gain, but by what one is willing to give." The silence that followed was deafening. David felt all the color drain from his face. The prenuptial documents he had signed were different from what Emily was describing. Either he had been deceived about the content, or some changes had been made without his knowledge. Emily stepped down from the stage and returned to David's side, who was clearly in shock. She held his hand firmly and smiled at the guests approaching to congratulate them on their generous and thoughtful decision. "Surprised?" she whispered in his ear, with a tone that mixed sweetness and something that sounded dangerously like victory. David tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come out. He was beginning to understand that he had gotten involved in something much more complex than he had imagined. Emily wasn't the naive victim he had judged her to be. There was a calculating intelligence behind those sweet eyes, a mind that had anticipated his moves and prepared countermeasures. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. David tried to maintain appearances, talking with guests and smiling for photos, but his mind was in complete chaos. Every interaction revealed more clues that he had been carefully manipulated since their first meeting. When they finally arrived at the apartment they would share from that night on, David could no longer contain his questions. "Emily, we need to talk," he said as soon as they closed the door. "Of course," she replied, positioning the chair near the large window overlooking the ocean. "About what, specifically?" "About everything," he said, sitting in the armchair across from her. "About the messages I received today, about your decision to donate half the inheritance, about the property regime, about Abigail." "Oh," she said, with a smile he had never seen before. "You received the messages. Was it you?" he asked, incredulous. "Not directly," she replied. "But I knew there would come a time when you would discover some truths. I preferred it to be today, at our wedding, so we could start our marriage based on honesty." David stood up, agitated. "Honesty? You're talking about honesty. I don't understand anything that's happening." "Sit down, David," she said, her voice calm but firm. "It's time for you to know who you really married today." He obeyed, more out of shock than by his own will. "First," Emily began, You need to know that I know exactly why you approached me. I know about your debts, about your family's financial situation, about the plan you and your mother devised to take advantage of my situation. David felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. How did you... I investigated you even before our first date, she said simply. The cafe where we met by chance was carefully chosen because I knew you passed by there every day. The books I dropped were strategically placed so you would feel compelled to help. You set up our first meeting, he asked, incredulous. I set up much more than that, she replied. I orchestrated our entire relationship, David. Every romantic dinner, every gift you gave me with my own money, every sweet word whispered in my ear. It was all part of a test. A test for what? To see how far you would go, she said, and for the first time her voice carried a note of sadness. To understand if there was any chance you could develop real feelings for me, or if you would be capable of continuing to lie indefinitely. David fell silent, processing the revelations. Everything he had believed about their relationship was crumbling before his eyes. Why? He finally asked. If you knew everything from the start, why did you go through with it? Why did you marry me? Emily took a deep breath before answering. Because I needed to prove something to myself, she said. After the accident, after discovering the true intentions of the man I loved before you, I began to believe I would never be loved for who I really am, that my condition would forever make me an object of pity or financial interest. There was another man. Ryan, she said, the man you met today at the party. We were engaged when the accident happened. 3 days after I left the hospital, he ended the relationship, claiming he couldn't handle my new reality. David felt a pang of something he couldn't identify. Compassion, anger, guilt. I closed myself off to relationships for 2 years, Emily continued, until a friend suggested an experiment to find a man who was clearly only interested in my money and see if it would be possible to turn financial interest into true love. And you chose me as your guinea pig? Asked David bitterly. I chose you because, unlike other candidates I investigated, you showed moments of genuine concern for me, she replied. Small gestures that served no purpose other than real care. The way you always checked if I was comfortable, how your eyes softened when I told you about my difficult days. David remembered those moments. He had been surprised several times by unexpected feelings of protection and affection for Emily, feelings he tried to suppress because they weren't part of the plan. So our marriage is... what? An experiment? He asked. Our marriage is an opportunity, she said, for you to prove you can be the man I glimpsed in certain moments, and for me to prove I can be loved despite my limitations. And if I fail your test, then you'll have learned a valuable lesson about the consequences of taking advantage of someone's vulnerability, she replied, with a firmness that made him swallow hard. And I'll have confirmed my worst suspicions about human nature. And Abigail? Who is she really? Emily hesitated before answering. Abigail is my younger sister, she admitted. She's been in a rehabilitation clinic for the past 6 months. Drug problems that started after the accident. She blamed herself for what happened to me. What do you mean she blamed herself? She was driving the car, said Emily, her voice dropping to nearly a whisper. We were coming back from a party. She had been drinking. I insisted on driving. During the argument, we ended up crashing. I protected her from the impact, but I took the worst of it. David felt the weight of the revelation. The complexity of the situation was far beyond what he had imagined. It wasn't just about money or his attempt to take advantage of a wealthy woman. It was about a family shattered by trauma, about guilt, about a desperate search for redemption and true love. And your mother, Nancy, was she involved in the plan? Your mother didn't know about my knowledge of your intentions, replied Emily. But I knew her long before I met you. What do you mean? She worked for my family for a few years when I was a teenager, explained Emily. She was responsible for cleaning our offices, a hard-working, honest woman who would do anything to support her son alone. David was paralyzed. His mother had worked for Emily's family. How had she not mentioned that when she suggested he get close to her? "Your mother doesn't remember me," continued Emily. "I was just a spoiled teenager she saw occasionally. But I remembered her, the dedication with which she spoke about you, the sacrifices she made to pay for your education. So when I approached you, I already knew exactly who you were," she completed. "Mrs. Wilson's son, the young man who graduated in business administration, despite financial hardships, who got a job at a mid-sized company but still struggled to help his family." David felt completely exposed, as if his entire life had been read like an open book. "That's why you accepted my approach so easily," he murmured. "Exactly," she confirmed. "And that's why I hoped that, upon getting to know the person I really am, you might develop genuine feelings for me." "And if I say that's already happened?" asked David, surprising himself with the honesty of the question. Emily looked at him intensely, studying his expression. "Then we'll have to discover whether those feelings are strong enough to overcome the initial betrayal," she said. "Whether you can love me knowing there will be no financial benefit, that marrying me might actually mean more responsibilities and challenges than you imagined." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. That night, David barely slept. Lying in the bedroom he would now share with Emily, his mind tried to process all the revelations. The woman he had married was completely different from what he had imagined, smarter, more manipulative, but also more vulnerable and wounded than he could have anticipated. In the days following the wedding, life settled into a strange routine. David continued working at the consulting firm where he was employed, but now he shared Emily's elegant apartment on the San Diego waterfront. The contrast between his previous life and this new reality was striking. Emily proved to be a complex companion. During the day, she worked as an independent financial consultant, meeting with clients via video call from her home office. David discovered she had maintained her active career even after the inheritance, which contradicted the image of a lazy heiress he had built in his mind. "Why do you keep working?" he asked one morning, watching her prepare a presentation on her computer. "Because my identity can't depend only on the money I inherited," she replied without looking away from the screen. "I need to know I have value for what I produce, not just for what I received." Her answer made him reflect on his own motivations. How long had it been since he had stopped valuing himself for his own merit and started focusing only on shortcuts to financial success? 2 weeks after the wedding, David received a call that would completely change his perspective on the situation. It was from Dr. Jeffrey Harris, the Thompson family lawyer. "Mr. David, I need to speak with you about some legal aspects related to the marriage," said the lawyer. "Mrs. Emily asked me to clarify certain matters that may not have been clear to you." They met at the lawyer's office in downtown San Diego. Dr. Jeffrey was a man of about 60 with a serious and professional appearance. "Mr. David, I'll be direct," the lawyer began. "Your wife asked me to explain her actual financial situation to you because apparently there are some misunderstandings that need to be cleared up." "What kind of misunderstandings?" "First, about the value of the inheritance," said Dr. Jeffrey, opening a folder with documents. "The $3 million you believe she has no longer exist in that form." David felt his heart race. "What do you mean?" "Emily's father, Mr. Thompson, left a complex inheritance," the lawyer explained. "Most of it was in long-term investments and properties that, due to the economic crisis in recent years, have significantly lost their value. What remained was largely consumed by her medical treatments after the accident. But she lives well. She has this apartment." "The apartment was purchased with the insurance money from the accident," clarified Dr. Jeffrey. "And she lives on what she earns from her work as a financial consultant, which is successful, but doesn't generate the fortune you imagined." David fell silent, trying to absorb the information. "So she's not rich?" he finally asked. "She has a comfortable life, but she's far from the millionaire heiress you thought you had found," replied the lawyer. "In fact, with the ongoing costs of physical therapy and treatments, she needs to work to maintain her standard of living." "And why did she let me believe that?" Because she wanted to see if you would approach her for the money or if you would develop genuine feelings, said Dr. Jeffrey. It was a test, Mr. David, and now she wants to know if you will remain married to her knowing the truth. David left the lawyer's office completely shaken. Everything he had based his decision to marry Emily on was an illusion. She wasn't the financial solution he and his mother had imagined. In fact, by marrying her, he had taken on responsibilities that could make his life more difficult, not easier. When he arrived home that afternoon, Emily was on the balcony, reading a book while enjoying the sea breeze. She looked at him with an expectant expression. "Did you speak with Dr. Jeffrey?" she asked. "Yes," replied David, sitting in the chair beside her. "Why didn't you tell me the truth from the beginning?" "Because I needed to know if you were capable of loving me regardless of the money," she said. "And now I need to know if you'll stay with me, knowing I'm not the wealthy woman you thought you'd found." David looked at the ocean for a few minutes, organizing his thoughts. The truth was, in recent weeks, he had discovered aspects of Emily that attracted him far beyond any financial consideration. Her intelligence, her determination to maintain professional independence, the courageous way she faced her physical limitations. "What if I say I want to stay?" he asked. "Then we'll have to rebuild our relationship based on truth," she replied. "No lies, no manipulations, no games." "Does that include you telling me everything about the accident, about Ryan, about Abigail?" Emily took a deep breath. "That includes everything," she agreed. That's how in the following days David came to know the true story of Emily Thompson. The accident had happened 2 years earlier, on a rainy night when the sisters were returning from a graduation party. Abigail, who had recently turned 18, had drunk more than she should have. When it was time to go home, Emily insisted on driving. "We argued in the car," Emily recounted as they walked along the San Diego waterfront on a sunny afternoon. "Abigail wanted to drive, said she was fine. I didn't believe her. The argument became so intense that I didn't see the truck coming toward us. And you threw yourself to protect her." "Instinctively," she replied. "When I saw we were going to crash, my first impulse was to protect my younger sister. I ended up absorbing most of the impact. David occasionally stopped the wheelchair so she could rest or simply to watch the movement of the waves. He was beginning to understand the emotional complexity of the woman he had married." "And Ryan?" he asked, fearful of the answer. "Ryan and I had been dating for 3 years," said Emily. "We had marriage plans, plans to build a family. He was, or I thought he was, the love of my life." "What happened after the accident?" "He visited the hospital a few times in the first days," she told him, and David could hear the still present pain in her voice. "But I noticed he was becoming increasingly uncomfortable, increasingly distant. A week after I left the hospital, he asked to talk." "And he broke up with you?" "He said he couldn't handle the situation, that it wasn't what he had imagined for his life," she replied. "That he loved me, but that love sometimes wasn't enough." David felt an unexpected anger toward a man he barely knew. The idea of someone abandoning Emily at the moment she most needed support deeply troubled him. "Was that when you decided to close yourself off to relationships?" "That was when I began to believe my condition would make me forever a burden to any man," she said. "That I would never be truly loved, only tolerated or used." "And Abigail, how did she handle all this?" Emily was silent for a few minutes before answering. "Abigail destroyed herself with guilt," she said finally. "She started using drugs to deal with the feeling of responsibility for the accident. I tried to help her, but she pulled away from me. She said she couldn't look at me without remembering what she had caused." "Was that why she went to the rehabilitation clinic?" "After an overdose 6 months ago," Emily confirmed. "It was the moment I realized I needed to stop focusing only on my own pain and help my sister recover." David began to understand better Emily's motivation for marrying him. It wasn't just about testing whether she could be loved despite the wheelchair. It was about proving to herself that she still had value, that she could build something positive amidst so much suffering and loss. In the following weeks, David and Emily developed a routine of honesty that was both uncomfortable and liberating. They talked about everything, about both of their pasts, about frustrated expectations, about the fears and insecurities each carried. David told her about the pressure he felt to be the family provider since adolescence, about how the difficult financial situation had led him to prioritize money over genuine relationships. Emily shared with him the daily challenges of living with physical limitations, the constant struggle against self-pity, and the need to prove her independence. "Did you know I truly fell in love with you?" said David one evening, as they dined on the apartment balcony. "When did you realize that?" she asked. "I think it was gradual," he replied. "But the moment I was sure was when you announced at the wedding reception that you would donate half the inheritance to charity. I should have been worried about the money, but all I could think about was how admirable you were." "And that doesn't scare you?" she asked. "Knowing you married a woman who has more responsibilities than financial benefits to offer?" "Other things scare me," he admitted. "I'm scared of the possibility of not being good enough for you, of not being able to be the partner you deserve." "Why do you think that?" "Because you're much stronger and smarter than I imagined," he said. "And because I started our relationship by lying about everything." Emily reached out and touched his face. "We all started this relationship lying about something," she said. "The difference is that now we're choosing the truth." It was around this time that David began to notice subtle changes in Emily's behavior. She seemed more tense on some days, more tired than usual. Initially, he attributed it to the stress of rebuilding the relationship on more honest foundations, but he soon realized there was something more. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked one morning, after noticing her vomiting in the bathroom. "Just not feeling well," she replied, but avoided looking directly at him. "Maybe we should go to the doctor," he suggested. "It's not necessary," she said quickly. "It's just stress." But David noticed that the episodes of illness became more frequent. Besides, Emily seemed to be hiding something. She received calls that she took in another room, had medical appointments she didn't fully explain. The truth came out 3 weeks later, in a way David never expected. He came home early from work and found Emily crying in the living room, holding some papers in her hands. "What happened?" he asked, rushing to sit beside her. "I need to tell you something," she said, through tears. "Something I found out a few weeks ago but didn't know how to tell you." David felt his heart race. More secrets, more revelations that would change everything again. "I'm pregnant," she said, and the words came out as a whisper. David was paralyzed. Pregnant? How was that possible? They had been careful, and besides... "But the doctors said it would be very difficult for you to get pregnant because of the accident," he said, confused. "They said it would be difficult. Not impossible," she corrected. "And it happened. I'm 2 months pregnant." David tried to process the information. A baby. They were going to have a child. The reality of the responsibility hit him like a wave. "How do you feel about this?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted, "and happy, and worried, and hopeful, all at the same time." "Why terrified?" "Because I don't know if you want to be a father," she said. "Because I don't know if we're ready for this. Because our situation is already complicated enough without adding a baby to the equation." David stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the ocean. A child would change everything. There was no turning back, no more room for doubts about the commitment to marriage. It was a real, permanent responsibility. "David," called Emily, worried by his silence. He turned to her, and for the first time in months, he knew exactly how he felt and what he wanted. "I want this baby," he said, coming back to sit beside her, "and I want to raise it with you. Not because I feel obligated, but because I can't imagine my life without the two of you." Emily began to cry again, but this time they were tears of relief. "Are you sure?" she asked, "even knowing it won't be easy, that we'll have extra challenges because of my condition?" "I'm sure," he replied, kissing her forehead. "In fact, I've never been so sure of anything in my life." The following months were a whirlwind of emotions and discoveries. Emily's pregnancy brought medical complications that required special care and constant monitoring. David found himself taking on responsibilities he had never imagined, attending medical appointments, learning about the specific risks of a pregnancy in a woman with a spinal cord injury, reorganizing the house to accommodate the growing needs. It was during one of these medical appointments that David received the most shocking revelation of all. Dr. Robert Wilson, The doctor overseeing Emily's care asked to speak with him privately. "Mr. Miller, I need to discuss something important regarding your wife's condition," said the doctor with a serious expression. "Is there some risk to the baby?" asked David, immediately concerned. "Not exactly," replied Dr. Wilson. "It's about Emily's paralysis. Based on the latest tests and the progression we've observed during the pregnancy, I have reason to believe her paralysis may not be permanent." David was speechless. "What do you mean?" "The tests show that the spinal cord injury wasn't as severe as we initially thought," explained the doctor. "There is evidence that the paralysis has a significant psychosomatic component. The emotional trauma of the accident may have blocked neurological functions that are, in fact, still intact." "Are you saying she could walk again?" "I'm saying it's a real possibility," confirmed Dr. Wilson, "but it would require a specific treatment combining intensive physical therapy with psychological counseling. And even then, there are no guarantees." "And does she know about this?" "I just explained the situation to her," said the doctor, "and she asked to speak with you about the treatment options." David returned to the room where Emily was waiting, his mind trying to process yet another twist in the story he thought he knew. "Did you hear what the doctor said?" she asked as soon as he entered. "Yes," replied David. "How do you feel about it?" "Confused," she admitted. "For 2 years, I built my identity around accepting that I would never walk again. I learned to value myself despite the wheelchair. And now you have the possibility to choose," David completed. "Exactly. And it's a difficult choice," she said. "The treatment is intensive, painful, and there are no guarantees. Besides, it would cost a significant amount of money that we don't have." "How much?" $40,000, she replied. "Practically all our savings plus a considerable loan." David fell silent, considering the implications. $40,000 for a treatment with no guarantees at a time when they were expecting a child and would need resources to support their growing family. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "Part of me wants to try to fight for the possibility of walking again. But another part is afraid of being disappointed, of losing everything we've built financially in pursuit of something that might not happen." "What if we decide to try?" asked David. "Then we'd have to use the insurance money that was used to buy the apartment," she explained. "We'd have to sell our house and move into something smaller, simpler. We'd have to start over financially." The irony of the situation wasn't lost on David. Months ago, he had married Emily thinking about making money. Now, he was considering spending everything they had to help her try to walk again, not for financial gain, but out of love. "Emily," he said, holding her hands, "I want you to try the treatment, even knowing what that means, especially knowing what that means," he replied, "because if there's a chance for you to walk again, to dance with our son, to feel whole again, then any financial sacrifice is worth it. And if it doesn't work, what if we lose everything and I'm still in the wheelchair?" "Then we will have tried," said David. "And I'd rather live with you having tried to regain your mobility than live forever wondering what would have happened if we hadn't tried." Emily began to cry, but this time David knew they were tears of gratitude and love. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Absolutely," he replied. "We'll face this together no matter what happens." The decision to start the treatment marked the beginning of a new phase in David and Emily's life. They sold their waterfront apartment and moved to a smaller house in the Pacific Beach neighborhood, also in San Diego, but much more modest. The money from the sale was entirely invested in Emily's treatment and the expenses that would come with the baby. The treatment was exhausting. 5 days a week, Emily spent 4 hours at the rehabilitation clinic, dividing her time between intensive physical therapy, hydrotherapy, and sessions with psychologists specializing in trauma. David rearranged his work schedule to accompany her whenever possible, also taking on the household responsibilities she couldn't fulfill due to treatment fatigue. It was during this time that they received an unexpected visit. Abigail appeared at the door of the new house on a rainy afternoon, visibly different from the lost young woman they had seen at the wedding. She had been sober for 4 months and had started working as an administrative assistant at a small company. "I came to apologize," she said, as soon as they welcomed her into the modest living room of the new house. "And to offer help." "Apologize for what?" asked Emily. "For disappearing when you needed support the most," replied Abigail. "For letting myself be consumed by guilt instead of helping you recover." "You were dealing with your own problems," said Emily gently. "That's no excuse," insisted Abigail. "You're my sister. You got hurt protecting me, and I abandoned you when you needed family the most." David watched the conversation between the sisters, noticing how the shared pain was finally being confronted openly and honestly. "And what kind of help do you want to offer?" he asked. "I want to help with the treatment expenses," said Abigail. "I know you spent all your savings. I got a job. It's not much, but I can contribute to part of the monthly costs." "Abigail, you don't have to—" "I do need to," interrupted the young woman. "I need to do something to help fix what I broke. Let me be part of the solution, not just the problem." That's how Abigail became a constant presence in David and Emily's life. She visited them regularly, helped with expenses when she could, and mainly offered emotional support during the most difficult days of the treatment. 3 months after starting intensive physical therapy, the first sign of progress happened. During a hydrotherapy session, Emily managed to slightly move the toes on her right foot. It was an almost imperceptible movement, but the physical therapist confirmed it had been voluntary. "Did you see?" asked Emily to David, who was observing the session. "Did you see my foot move?" David was so emotional he could barely respond. 2 tears streamed down his face as he nodded. "Yes, I saw," he managed to say. "I saw." From that moment on, the progress became more evident, though still very slow. First the toes, then sensations in her legs, small movements that gradually grew in intensity and control. Dr. Sarah Johnson, the physical therapist in charge of the case, explained that recovery would be very gradual and that there were no guarantees about how far it would go. "The important thing is to celebrate every small victory," she said, "and not to create unrealistic expectations about the final outcome." But David saw in Emily a determination that went beyond what any doctor had predicted. She dedicated herself to the exercises with an intensity that sometimes worried him. She woke before dawn to do stretches at home, religiously followed all medical recommendations, kept a detailed journal of every progress, no matter how small. "You don't need to push yourself so hard," he said one night, after finding her doing exercises in the living room at 11 o'clock. "Yes, I do," she replied, without stopping the movement. "This might be my only chance to become whole again." "You already are whole," said David, sitting on the floor beside her. "With or without the wheelchair, you're the most complete woman I know." "You don't understand," she said, finally stopping. "It's not about you finding me complete. It's about me feeling complete." "And you don't feel that way?" "No," she admitted. "Not since the accident. Even with all the progress I've made in accepting my condition, I've always known there was a part of me that was lost. And now, I can try to get it back." David began to understand that Emily's fight for physical recovery was also a fight for emotional recovery. She wasn't just trying to walk again. She was trying to become the person she was before the accident changed everything. When Emily reached 6 months of pregnancy, the doctors decided she needed to reduce the intensity of the treatment to avoid compromising the pregnancy. This frustrated her deeply, but she accepted the limitations out of love for the baby they were expecting. It was during this calmer period that David and Emily had time to talk about the future more concretely. They chose the baby's name, Nathan if it was a boy or Olivia if it was a girl, planned how the house would be organized with a child, discussed education and values they wanted to pass on. "Do you think we'll be good parents?" asked Emily one afternoon as they were assembling the crib in what would be the baby's room. "I think we'll learn to be," replied David, "and I think our child will have parents who know the importance of fighting for what they love. Even if I don't manage to walk completely again?" "Especially if you don't," he said, "because he'll learn that physical limitations don't define a person's worth, and that true love doesn't depend on perfection." 2 weeks before the due date, the event that neither of them expected happened. Emily was doing her morning exercises when she felt a different sensation in her legs. She tried to get up from the chair leaning on the nearby table, and managed to stand for a few seconds. "David!" she shouted. "David, come here!" He ran to the living room and found her standing, trembling with emotion and effort, but unmistakably standing. "My God," he whispered, "you're standing." "I'm standing," she repeated, as if she couldn't believe it. "I'm actually standing." It was a moment of pure joy that lasted just a few seconds before Emily needed to sit down again. But those seconds represented months of hard work, of hope, of fighting against limitations. They immediately called Dr. Wilson, who asked to see her at the hospital that same day. The tests confirmed that the recovery was happening faster than any medical prediction had suggested. "It's extraordinary," said the doctor. "The combination of physical treatment with the positive emotional state of pregnancy appears to have significantly accelerated neurological recovery." "Does this mean she'll walk normally again?" asked David. "It means the possibilities are much more promising than we thought," replied Dr. Wilson. "But we still need to be cautious. Full recovery may take several more months of intensive work." 3 days later, Emily went into labor. The birth of Olivia Thompson Miller was an event that brought together their entire chosen family: David, Abigail, Nancy, who had reconciled with her son and daughter-in-law after understanding the true nature of their relationship, and even Ryan, who had asked to make peace with Emily months earlier. "She's perfect," said David, holding his daughter for the first time. "She's ours," replied Emily, and there was a completeness in her voice that David hadn't heard in a long time. The first months with Olivia were challenging, but also transformative. David discovered a fatherhood he had never imagined for himself, sharing baby care responsibilities equally with Emily. Abigail became the devoted aunt who visited several times a week and always offered to help. Nancy, in turn, embraced the grandmother role with an enthusiasm that surprised everyone. She had initially been disappointed about the failure of the original financial plan, but after truly getting to know Emily and seeing David's genuine happiness, she came to value what they had built together. "Your son has become a better man than I ever imagined he could be," Nancy told Emily one afternoon as they cared for Olivia together. "He was always a good man," replied Emily. "He just needed to discover that for himself." When Olivia turned 3 months old, Emily resumed physical therapy with renewed intensity. Her motivation was different now. She wanted to walk not just for herself, but to be able to run after her daughter, to teach her to take her first steps, to be a complete mother in every sense. The progress was remarkable. Within 2 weeks, she could stand for several minutes. In 1 month, she took her first hesitant steps with support. In 2 months, she walked short distances using a walker. The day Emily managed to walk without support became etched in the family's memory. It was a Saturday afternoon, and she was playing with Olivia on the living room rug when she decided to try standing and walking to where David was sitting. "David," she called, still sitting on the floor. "What is it?" he asked, not looking up from his book. "Look at me." He looked up and saw Emily rising slowly without support. His eyes widened as she took her first step, then her second, then her third, walking determinedly toward him. "Emily," he whispered, dropping his book and standing up. She managed to walk the 15 feet between them and threw herself into his arms. They both cried, holding each other, while Olivia watched from her blanket on the floor, babbling as if celebrating with her parents. "I did it," said Emily through tears. "I really did it." "You did," confirmed David, holding her tightly. "My love, you did it." The following months were a complete recovery. Emily went back to walking normally, resumed activities she had abandoned years before, and most importantly, was able to experience motherhood to the fullest, running after Olivia when the little girl started crawling, playing in the park, doing all the activities she had feared she might never do again. The relationship between David and Emily solidified in a way neither of them had imagined possible at the beginning. What started as a financial interest on one side and an emotional test on the other turned into a deep love based on mutual respect, admiration, and true companionship. "Sometimes I wonder how our story would have been different if I had been honest with you from the start," said David one night as they watched Olivia sleep. "Maybe we wouldn't have made it here," replied Emily. "Maybe the journey we took together with all the lies and revelations was necessary for us to build something solid." You don't regret marrying me knowing my intentions? I regret having needed a test to find out if I could be loved, she said. But I don't regret choosing you to take that test. You turned out to be much better than I expected. And you turned out to be much stronger than I ever imagined possible, he replied. 1 year after Olivia's birth, David and Emily decided to renew their wedding vows. This time it would be a small, intimate ceremony with only close family and a few dear friends. But most importantly, it would be a ceremony based on truth and genuine love. The ceremony took place in the same church where they had originally married, but the contrast couldn't have been greater. Instead of the grand event filled with lies, it was a simple and sincere celebration. Emily walked down the aisle holding Olivia in her arms, while David waited for her at the altar with tears in his eyes. 1 year ago, I promised to love, honor, and protect Emily, said David during his vows. At that time, I didn't fully understand the meaning of those words. Today, after everything we've been through together, I renew that promise knowing exactly what they mean. Emily, you taught me what it means to truly love. You showed me that real strength has nothing to do with physical limitations, and that honesty is the foundation of any lasting relationship. David, said Emily, her voice emotional, when we first married, I was testing whether you could love me despite my limitations. Today I know you love me not in spite of them, but including them because they are part of who I am. You helped me regain not only the ability to walk, but the confidence that I can be loved completely. The priest who conducted the ceremony was the same one who had officiated the first wedding. During the homily, he commented on how rare it was to witness such a profound transformation in a couple. True love, he said, is not the kind that is born from perfect conditions, but the kind that grows despite imperfections. What we witness today is the result of two people who chose truth over convenience, growth over stagnation, and love over self-interest. When the vows were renewed, David and Emily kissed with a passion and certainty that did not exist at the first wedding. It was the kiss of two people who truly knew each other, who had been through real tests, and who had chosen to stay together not out of need or convenience, but out of genuine love. The reception after the ceremony was at their home, a simple event with a barbecue in the backyard and Olivia crawling among the guests. Abigail was there sober for over a year and working as an administrative manager at the company where she had started as an assistant. Nancy was there, proud of the man her son had become. Ryan was there too, no longer as a ghost from the past, but as a friend who had found his own happiness and sincerely wished the best for Emily. During the party, Dr. Wilson approached David for a private conversation. I want you to know that Emily's recovery was extraordinary, not just from a medical standpoint, said the doctor. How so? I've seen many cases of psychosomatic paralysis over the years, explained the doctor. Most patients recover partially, some return almost to normal, but rarely do I see a recovery as complete as your wife's. And what do you attribute that to? To the emotional environment you built together, replied Dr. Wilson. The stability, the love, the motivation she found in motherhood and marriage. All of this helped her body completely release the psychological blocks that were preventing recovery. David looked at Emily, who was across the yard talking with her friends, while Olivia played at her feet. It was hard to believe that the strong, radiant woman he saw there was the same person who had married him in a state of vulnerability and uncertainty about her own worth. Doctor, said David, may I ask you something? Of course. If Emily hadn't recovered physically, if she had remained in the wheelchair, would that change anything about the overall medical prognosis? Dr. Wilson smiled. Are you asking if she would be less healthy or less capable of having a full life? Asked the doctor. Exactly. Absolutely not, replied Dr. Wilson. The physical recovery was a wonderful bonus, but Emily had already achieved the emotional and psychological recovery that was much more important. She would be a completely fulfilled wife, mother and person with or without the ability to walk. The doctor's answer confirmed something David already knew in his heart. He would have loved and stayed with Emily regardless of her physical recovery. What had developed between them went far beyond any physical limitation or ability. When night fell and the guests had left, David and Emily sat on the house's porch, watching Olivia sleep in the portable crib beside them. The sea was calm, and the night breeze carried the familiar smell of salt that so characterized San Diego. "What are you thinking about?" asked Emily, noticing David's thoughtful silence. "I'm thinking about how unlikely our story is," he replied. "A self-interested man marries a wealthy woman who isn't actually wealthy, who's actually testing whether he can truly love her, and in the end, they actually fall in love and live happily ever after." "Do you think we live happily ever after?" she asked, teasing. "I think we live happily for now," replied David, "and that we're going to work every day to keep living happily ever after." "That's a good philosophy," agreed Emily. "Happily ever after as a daily project, not as a guaranteed destination." "Exactly," said David, "and I'm willing to work on it for the rest of my life." "Even knowing there will still be challenges?" she asked. "That raising Olivia won't be easy, that maintaining a happy marriage requires constant effort, that life always brings unexpected surprises." "Especially knowing that," he replied, "because now I know that we're a real team, that we face problems together, that we support each other, that we grow together instead of trying to use each other." Emily got up from her chair and went to sit on David's lap, something she couldn't do during the 2 years she was in the wheelchair. "You know something?" she said, hugging him. "I'm grateful for everything we've been through. Because of the accident, because of the wheelchair, because of your initial lie, because of my manipulation, because of all the obstacles." "Why?" "Because all of that brought us here," she explained. "If any part of our story had been different, perhaps we wouldn't have developed the depth of love we have today." "Do you really believe that?" "I believe that the best things in life are born from the most complicated situations," she said. "And that true love isn't the kind that happens easily, but the kind that survives difficulties." Olivia stirred in her crib, making a small noise that made them smile. Their daughter represented not just the family's future, but also concrete proof that they had built something real and lasting. "What do you want her to know about our story when she's older?" asked David. "I want her to know that her parents met in a complicated way, that they made mistakes, that they went through hardships, but that they chose love above all," replied Emily. "I want her to learn that true relationships aren't based on perfection, but on daily choices of honesty, commitment, and mutual growth. And I want her to know that there's no such thing as love at first sight," David added. "There's attraction at first sight, interest at first sight, but true love is built over time through shared experiences and conscious choices. Most of all, I want her to know that limitations of any kind never define a person's worth," said Emily. "That true strength comes from within, and that she can overcome any obstacle if she has determination and support from the right people." They stayed silent for a few minutes, simply enjoying the peace of that moment. After so much turbulence, so much uncertainty, so much struggle, they had finally found a point of balance and happiness. "David," Emily said eventually. "Yes?" "Thank you for becoming the man I needed instead of remaining the man you were when we met." "Thank you for giving me the chance to become that man," he replied, "and for believing I could be better than I seemed." "I always believed," she said, "even when you didn't believe in yourself." And that's how David and Emily Thompson Miller found their happy ending, not through an easy or predictable path, but through a complex journey of personal growth, honesty, forgiveness, and true love. They had discovered that the best relationships aren't those that start perfectly, but those that improve over time, through mutual commitment to truth and growth. The wheelchair that once symbolized limitation became a symbol of overcoming. The marriage that began with lies transformed into a union based on the deepest truth. And two people who met for the wrong reasons discovered they could love for the right ones. Years later, when telling their story to friends, David and Emily always emphasized that it wasn't a fairy tale. It was better than that. It was a real story, with real problems, imperfect solutions, and a love that grew not despite the difficulties, but because of them. Olivia grew up in a home where honesty and compassion were fundamental values, where limitations were seen as challenges to be overcome, and where love was demonstrated not through pretty words, but through consistent actions and daily choices to prioritize the family's well-being above any individual interest. And so, a story that began with a lie became one of the most beautiful truths either of them had ever experienced. The truth that true love can transform even the most imperfect people into better versions of themselves. The end of the story. And so, dear listener, what did you think of this story of overcoming and true love? David and Emily teach us that the best relationships aren't born from perfect conditions, but rather grow stronger through life's storms. Tell us in the comments, do you believe people can truly change for love? Leave your like if this story touched your heart and subscribe to the channel for more moving stories like this one. Your participation means so much to us.